So everyone knows trains occasionally derail, sometimes with disastrous results. Like this explosion and raging fire when a train loaded with oil went off the tracks in North Dakota, or when this oil train fell in the James River in Lynchburg, Virginia, or when 47 people died in Quebec, Canada after a derailment and fire that destroyed 30 buildings. So moving flammable or explosive energy on rails does come with hazards, which is why the attorney generals in Maryland and D.C. and 14 other states are deeply concerned that adding liquefied natural gas to the list of approved cargoes to move by rail is a really bad idea. The states are objecting to President Trump's executive order to allow liquefied natural gas to be shipped in approved rail tank cars. According to documents filed with the U.S. Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, the states claim moving LNG in rail cars would put residents, first responders, and the environment at greater risk of catastrophic accidents, especially since the gas might be moved on tracks that are shared with passenger trains that move through big cities, like Baltimore and Washington. The history of LNG is fraught with accidents, including an early explosion in Cleveland in 1944 that killed 131 people and leveled 79 homes. The U.S. is using more natural gas now than ever thanks to fracking and low prices. But protests and environmental concerns have slowed down the construction of new pipelines. Liquefying the natural gas into supercooled LNG for transport by rail is seen as an alternative, according to the Trump administration. Scott Brunel, WUSA 9.